Astronomy and the Bible. Our roadmap through this talk will be this. First of all, the two models. What does the creation model have to teach about the origin of the universe? And what does the evolution model teach about the origin of the universe? Then we'll talk about evidences for age. How old is this universe? Then we'll look at the origin of stars. Then scientific evidence and the Big Bang. How does the Big Bang compare against the observable science? Then we'll end it with something called the Bible and Big Bang cosmology. So let's start with describing the two models. The first model I'm going to talk about is evolution. I'm going to lump into there something called theistic evolution. Now, theistic evolution, there are several different forms. One is the day-age theory. That is the idea that God did use the Big Bang to start everything off. The universe is billions of years old, and the days of creation are long, indefinite periods of time. Then there's the gap theory, which puts billions of years of time, geologic time, in between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Then there's the popular progressive creationist movement model, which teaches again that God used the Big Bang and that the days of creation were long, indefinite periods of time that overlapped each other. Now, all those models, evolution and theistic evolution, all believe in the Big Bang. They believe the universe is 12 to 15 billion years old, and they believe that stars formed by natural processes. Then there's the other model, which I call the biblical model. The biblical model states that God spoke the universe into existence all by his great power. He did not use the Big Bang. The Bible teaches that the universe is young and that God created all the stars and they did not evolve by natural processes. So we have a difference between the two models. But are they really that different? One of the main differences tends to be the age issue. Evolution believes that this universe must be billions of years old and that there was a Big Bang that started everything off. The proponents of the biblical model teach that the universe has to be less than the required age for evolution. In other words, called the young Earth model. Now again, are these two models really that different? What are the implications of accepting the Big Bang model as part of in the beginning God created? Well, first of all, we need to understand the Big Bang is associated with long ages and stellar formation by natural processes. What does this mean if we put that in the Bible? Well, from a biblical perspective, it means this. First of all, God's creation was not 6 literal days, but long, indefinite periods of time. It means that when Genesis 1:31, when God pronounces his entire creation very good, it does not mean very good. It means maybe sort of good, because there had been billions of years of death and decay going on before God finished his creation. It also means that there would have been death before sin. Because what was going on again for those billions of years before Adam and Eve came on board? There had been billions of years of death and decay. That's what the fossil record is. It also means that this earth is billions of years old. The flood was not a worldwide flood. It has to be some local, regionalized flood. The Big Bang model also would mean that in Colossians 1:16, when God said he created all things, the word all doesn't mean all. And finally, we have to look at what do the heavens declare if God did not make the stars. So there are some tremendous implications of putting the Big Bang and long ages into the Bible. So let's evaluate the evidence. When we look at textbooks and we look at scientific journals, we see a pattern in all our textbooks. We see they all teach the Big Bang as a fact, billions of years ago. They all teach that distant starlight would take billions of years to reach us, therefore this universe must be billions of years old. But the question is, are we being given all the evidence? Now we can test this accuracy and validity of each of these models, creation, evolution, by actually examining all the data. Now, what we're going to see here as we go through some of this data is evidence against one position will be support for the other position. In other words, if we find scientific evidence that supports this Earth and universe is young, that is evidence against the evolution model of the Big Bang and long ages. However, if we find evidence that says this universe has to be old, then that would be evidence against a young Earth and young universe model. So let's look at some of these evidences. And our first one is called the recession of the moon. Now, the Earth has a mass and it pulls on our moon. And the moon likewise has a mass, and it pulls back on the Earth. So we have this tugging and pulling. And by that tugging and pulling going on between the Earth and the moon, it causes that moon to slowly spiral away from the Earth. Now, is that a problem? Well, not really, because the moon has been measured to be receding from us about 4 centimeters a year, a little less than 2 inches a year. Now, is that a problem with the tides that we have? Well, let's go back in time and see how this might affect the age issue. If we were to go back about 1,000 years, that would mean the moon is about 125 feet closer to us. Is that a problem? Well, not at all. Insignificant as far as any tidal actions or any other actions. How about if we go back 1,000,000 years? Well, that would put the moon about 28.4 miles closer to the Earth. Again, insignificant. No real problems there. If we go back about 10 million years, that would put the moon about 284 miles closer to the Earth. Again, not that much significance, considering the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth. If we go back 100 million years, now the moon is about 2,840 miles closer to the Earth. We might have some significance there, not much. But if we go back 1 billion years, that puts the moon about 28,400 miles closer to the Earth. Now we might have some significance in the tidal actions. But if we go back 1.4 billion years, that puts the moon in contact with the Earth. Now we have a real problem. You see, if we look at this line, looking at this chart here, on the left-hand side we have the distance from the Earth. On the bottom we have the time. And this acceleration of the moon receding from the Earth, is based on its proximity to the Earth. The closer it is, the faster it is receding from us. So if we were to go back 1.4 billion years, we see that the moon is actually in contact with the Earth. And it's receding from the Earth very rapidly. Until about 1 billion years ago, we see this line kind of tends to go very linear. So 1.4 billion years is a maximum. We can't have a solar system that old, based on our current calculations of the moon receding from the Earth about 4 centimeters a year. That is evidence that this solar system, this Earth-Moon relationship, cannot be as old as the evolutionist model. So evidence number one for a younger solar system than evolution requires. Well, let's go to another evidence, comets. Now, first of all, what are comets? Well, they're nothing more than great big dirty ice cubes out there. Big dirty ice cubes. Now, if our solar system is billions of years old, there's a problem with the comets we see out there circling around our sun solar system. See, we have comets dividing up into 2 periods, where we're called long period comets and short period comets. Now, long period comets are comets that circle around our sun about every 200 years or longer. And short period comets are those comets that circle around our sun, our solar system, every 200 years or less. Now, here's the situation. As those comets circle around our sun, being a big dirty ice cube, they tend to lose some of their mass. After so many revolutions around our sun, our solar system, they would have lost all their mass. If this universe, if this solar system is 4.5 billion years old, we should have no short period nor long period comets. So what is the solution by the evolutionist community? Well, the evolutionists postulate that there's this ring of comets so far out there, well beyond Pluto, that nobody can see it. It is called the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud. And every once in a while, one of these comets in that Oort cloud somehow comes in and starts circling around our sun. And that is why we still have long period comets. Now, there's some problems with the Oort cloud. One, it's never been observed. It's a claim with no observable evidence. There's no evidence that it really exists. And third, there wouldn't be enough mass for a hypothetical Oort cloud. Because by the evolutionist's own model, as the solar system is being formed, there are tremendous collisions of different masses going on out there. So many collisions, there would not be enough mass left to form an Oort cloud. So 3 problems right there for the existence of the Oort cloud. Well, let's take a look what some scientists have to say about the Oort cloud. Here's Don DeYoung, who has his PhD in physics, writes in his book, Astronomy in the Bible. And he says, the existence of the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud of comets has not been verified. Perhaps there is an alternative, and he says, the presence of comets may be evidence that the solar system is not as old as is often assumed. Now notice he talks about the Oort cloud in here, but he also mentions another cloud called the Kuiper belt. The Kuiper belt is that ring of comets that's somewhere around Neptune that is supposed to be feeding the short period comets. Those comets that circle around our sun every 200 years or less. Now, we have seen some objects in this Kuiper belt. We call them Kuiper belt objects. There have been about 600 of these objects observed. But here's the problem. Here's the problem. You see, when we see these comets circle around the sun and go by our planet, about the largest size we ever see is about 10 kilometers in diameter. We never see anything bigger than that. But every object we have observed in this Kuiper belt is at least 100 kilometers, up to 100 to maybe up to 500 kilometers in diameter. If we were to see an object of this size pass by our planet, it would be a tremendous spectacular vision. But we never see anything that big. They're always very, very small. So there's no evidence that the Oort cloud exists. It's never been observed. And the Kuiper belt also does not solve the problem for the short period comets. Now, here's another gentleman, Timothy Ferris, wrote a book called The Whole Shebang, A State of the Universe Report, 1997. Now, this book is actually used as a text in many universities as they're part of their astronomy course. And this is what he has to say. Though the Oort cloud has yet to be observed, the theory accounts so well for the distribution of comets' orbits that most astronomers today accept its existence. Now, doesn't that sound like faith? Let's take a look at the definition of faith here. And it says, an unquestioning belief that does not require proof or evidence. Isn't that the same thing the scientists are saying about the Oort cloud? We accept its existence even though we can't observe it. Folks, that is faith. And they're teaching that faith in our science classes today. Now, here's another gentleman who has a comment about the Oort cloud. This is what he says. Many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution. Yet, there is not yet a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. Now, who said this? Well, it wasn't a creationist. It was Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan, a prominent evolutionist, astronomer, made this statement, that there's not one shred of evidence for its existence. But yet, the evolutionists continue to teach it in our classes to force a faith system on our students. Here's another gentleman, Dr. Danny Faulkner, who has his PhD in astronomy. He writes in the Technical Journal an article called More Problems for the Oort Cloud. And he says this, since it cannot be detected, the Oort cloud is not a scientific concept. This is not bad science, but non-science masquerading as science. The existence of comets is good evidence that the solar system is only a few thousand years old. Evidence for one position is support for that position and evidence against the other position. We have seen several evidences right now for a young solar system. Let's look at a third, the age of the sun. Now, what does the sun do? How does it do what it does? Well, it goes through something called thermonuclear fusion, turning hydrogen into helium, converting hydrogen into helium. Now, as this process is going on, the core of the sun should alter, and the sun should go brighter with age. Should go brighter with age. Now, think of this. As it's growing brighter with age, that means it's getting hotter and hotter out here. Now, if the sun was 4.5 billion years old, as the evolutionists claim, the sun should have brightened by about 40% since its origin, 4.5 billion years ago. In other words, we should be about 40% hotter today than 4.5 billion years ago. Now, what does that mean? Well, the scientists today accept that the average temperature on this planet is about 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 Celsius. That is the average temperature. And they agree that's been about the average temperature for billions of years. Now, they believe we also have undergone different ice ages and different climatical changes. But the average temperature over this time has been about 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, let's go back in time. According to the evolutionists, life began about 3.5 billion years ago. Now, in order to have this life originate by natural processes, they require heat, a lot of heat. But think of this now. If we were to go back about 3.5 billion years ago, that would mean the sun would be about 25% less bright than it is today. And putting the sun at 25% less bright than it is today would mean that the sun would be about, the average temperature on this planet would be about 32 degrees cooler than it is today. So if you take the average temperature, 59 degrees, subtract 32 degrees, we have an average temperature on this earth 3.5 billion years ago below freezing. But what did the evolutionists require for life to originate by natural processes? Heat. But this entire planet is frozen. It doesn't work. Evidence for one model is evidenced against the other model. We've now seen 3 evidences to support a young solar system. We've seen recession of the moon. We've seen comets. We shouldn't have either long period or short period comets. We've seen the age of the sun refutes an old solar system. Let's look at 2 more. Supernova remnants and galaxy formation. Now, supernova remnants. First of all, what is a supernova? What happens? Well, it's when a star explodes. Now, here's the process. When a star is forming, when a star is doing a thermonuclear fusion, what is happening? It's converting hydrogen into helium, then into carbon, then eventually into oxygen, then eventually into iron, and that's where the fusion process stops. It doesn't go beyond iron. And at that point, the fusion process stops, and that star begins to gravitationally collapse in on itself, and it triggers a tremendous explosion called a supernova. Now, what is a supernova remnant? That is the leftover gas and dust cloud from that tremendous explosion. Now, we have observed some of these supernova remnants. In 1054 AD, the Chinese saw one in the sky that lasted for almost a whole month. It was as bright as Venus out there. In 1604, Galileo and Kepler saw a supernova. Even in the 1980s, we observed another supernova. So we have observed these stars exploding. We know that happens. But how does this apply to the age issue? Well, one of the things we do with these supernova remnants, again, these gas and dust clouds, is we divide them up into stages. First, second, and third stages. Now, what we mean by these stages is this. A first stage supernova remnant would be a star that has recently exploded. Maybe in the last few years to maybe several hundred years ago. We have the second stage supernova remnants. Those are the stars that may have exploded within the last maybe hundreds of years to maybe thousands and thousands of years. Then we have the third stage supernova remnants, which we classify as stars that have exploded in millions of years ago. Now, if this universe, this galaxy, solar system, is billions of years old, we should expect to see a number of these supernova remnants in each one of these stages. In other words, if the universe is billions of years old, we should expect to see at least 2 recently exploded stars or supernova remnants. If this universe is billions of years old, we should see about 2,260 second stage supernova remnants, ones that have occurred in the last hundreds of years to maybe tens of thousands of years ago. If this universe is billions of years old, we should see at least 5,000 third stage supernova remnants, ones that have occurred millions of years ago. But if this universe is young, say about 7,000 years old, then we should see about 2 recently exploded stars. If it is young, we should see about 125 in the second stage, ones that have occurred just in the last hundreds of years to tens of thousands of years ago. And if it's young, we should see no supernova remnants that occurred millions of years ago because there hasn't been enough time for those gas and dust clouds to expand that far out. Now, a good test of a model, a good test of the reliability of any theory is how well does it predict what we observe. Now, let's test both these. What have we actually observed out there? Well, we've actually observed about 5 recently exploded stars. So both models are doing pretty good prediction there. Both doing pretty good there. Now, how many second stage have we observed? About 200. Which model is doing the better predictive capability there? The young universe. And we have found, observed, 0 third-stage supernova remnants. What does that suggest now? What this is suggesting is this universe is not old enough for to have all these star explosions or supernova remnants out there. In other words, the evidence for one position is evidence against the other position. The evidence here clearly supports a young universe. Well, let's go to another one, galaxy formation. Galaxies come in different shapes. And one of these shapes is called a spiral galaxy. You observe it and you see it by these long arms spiraling around behind it. And these spiral galaxies have their shape. And if these spiral galaxies are billions of years old, what we believe is they should not exist out there anymore. See, as these galaxies are rotating around, these spirals will generally lose their shape and will just have one great big glob of a galaxy. And the estimation is these galaxies, these spiral galaxies, should lose their shape between 1 and 2 billion years of rotating around. Now, here's the problem. When we look out there and identify what are supposed to be some of the oldest areas of the universe, some of the oldest galaxies, they still have their spiral shape. What does that suggest? Well, based on all our current calculations, it suggests these galaxies are not tens of billions of years old, but less than the required age for an old universe. Again, evidence for one position is evidence against the other. Well, let's take a look at galaxy formation, because that seems to be a problem, because the evolutionists don't even know how galaxies formed yet. But here's a book called The Facts on File Dictionary of Astronomy, written in 1994. Now, this book has to be true because it has the word facts in there. And this is what they have to say. Galaxies must have condensed out of the gases expanding from the Big Bang. Details of the formation of galaxies are still highly uncertain, as is their subsequent evolution. Now, notice the words must have. That means they don't have a clue. They're just assuming it happened because of a belief in evolution, not based on any observable science. So why is this statement any more scientific than in the beginning God created? You see, we're being taught a faith in our science classrooms. Our students are being forced to listen to and hear a faith called evolution. We need to keep science to the science classrooms, not somebody else's faith. So we've looked at the two models. We've looked at evidence for age. Now let's look at the origin of stars. Where did all these trillions of stars come from? And again, I want to use this statement. Are we being given all the evidence or just selected data to support a particular idea called evolution? Well, let's look at the different models for how stars originated. The evolution model postulates that stars evolved billions of years before the Earth. The theistic model assumes stars evolved billions of years before the Earth. Notice there's no difference between those two models there. But the biblical model clearly states that on day 1, God made the Earth, and on day 4, he made the stars. So we have a difference in these models now. Well, let's take a look what a prominent astronomer has to say out there, Dr. Hugh Ross. He's an astronomer and also one of the leaders in this progressive creationist movement. And this is his statement about star formation. And he says this: the entire process of stellar evolution is by natural processes alone. We do not have to invoke divine intervention at any stage in the history of the life cycle of the stars that we observe. Now, notice he's saying this. We don't need to invoke God at any stage of stellar formation. That means the origin of stars or any part of the star's formation or evolution process. Now, is that statement consistent with the Bible? Well, let's take a look. What does the Bible have to say about stars? Well, Genesis 1:16 says this: and God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Right there, that says that statement by the progressive creationist movement is absolutely wrong. But you know, the Bible even says more. Isaiah 40:26 says this, "Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things that bringeth out their host by number?" The Bible teaches clearly that God made the stars. Psalm 8:3 says, "When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained." And there's more. Exodus 20 verse 11 says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them." 6 days he made everything. Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." Psalm 33 verse 6 says, "By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and the host of them." Psalm 148 verse 5 says, "For he commanded, and they were created." Isaiah 45:12 says, "I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their hosts have I commanded." And then Nehemiah 9:6 says, "Thou, even thou, art Lord alone. Thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host." John 1:3 says, "All things were made by him." Revelation 4:11 says, "For thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created." So is stellar formation by natural processes compatible with Scripture? Absolutely not. Right there, that says the entire progressive creationist movement is false. They are not teaching the Bible. It is by the word of the Lord that the heavens and the host of the heavens, the stars, the moon, and the sun were created. The Bible is very clear on that issue. So let's take a scientific look at star formation. How are stars formed? What is the popular theory out there for how stars are formed? When we open up these textbooks and we read about astronomy, we read all these other books, they talk about, first of all, we have to have this gas and dust cloud. This gas and dust cloud is swirling around out there. And as it swirls around and around, it begins to gravitationally collapse in on itself, and a star is formed. Is that true? Absolutely not. You can go to your basic physics books and read about gas pressures and find out that kind of a statement is not true. See, as a gas and dust cloud swirls around, it will begin to gravitationally collapse in on itself. But what happens as a result of that is called heat pressure. And that heat pressure from all those gas molecules moving faster and faster will cause that gas cloud to expand out and overtake the gravitational input. So as a cloud swirls around and around, it will not gravitationally collapse. It will expand. Now, it is theoretically possible to collapse, but it has to be such a condensed form to overtake the heat pressure. But we see none of that out there. Let's see what some of the scientists have to say about their observations of gas and dust clouds. Again, Don DeYoung, PhD in physics, writes, "The complete birth of a star has never been observed. The principles of physics demand some special conditions for star formation and also for a long time period. A cloud of hydrogen gas must be compressed to a sufficiently small size so that gravity dominates." And then he concludes, "In space, however, almost every gas cloud is light years in size, hundreds of times greater than the critical size needed for a stable star. As a result, outward gas pressures cause these clouds to spread out farther, not contract." Here's Fred Whipple in his book, The Mystery of Comets, Washington, D.C., Smithsonian Institute Press. Says this, "Precisely how a section of an interstellar cloud gravitationally into a star is still a challenging theoretical problem. Astronomers have yet to find an interstellar cloud in the actual process of collapse." You know, you won't see any of these kind of quotes in school textbooks. Why? Because once they get in there, once the true science gets in the textbooks, evolution doesn't look so good. Here's Danny Faulkner again, PhD in astronomy, states this, "To many astronomers, it seems reasonable that stars could form from these clouds of gas. Most astronomers believe that the clouds gradually contract under their own weight to form stars. This process has never been observed. But if it did occur, it would take many human lifetimes." And he concludes, "It is known that clouds do not spontaneously collapse to form stars. The clouds possess considerable mass, but they are so large that their gravity is very feeble. Any decrease in size would be met by an increase in gas pressure that would cause a cloud to re-expand. And here's Hans Alban, Nobel Prize winner, NASA, says, there is general belief that stars are forming by gravitational collapse. In spite of vigorous efforts, no one has yet found any observational indication of confirmation. Thus, the generally accepted theory of stellar formation may be one of 100 unsupported dogmas which constitute a large part of present-day astrophysics. The observed evidence clearly supports we don't know how stars form by natural processes. There's no one has ever seen a star form. Anybody who makes the claim they have seen a star form must be very old, because it would take thousands of years for this thing to happen. And finally, here's a couple more astronomers wrote in Science Journal. Despite numerous efforts, we have yet to directly observe the process of stellar formation. The origin of stars represents one of the fundamental unsolved problems of contemporary astrophysics. But now let's go back to our facts on file dictionary of astronomy. Again, we got the word facts in there. It's got to be true. And this is what they're teaching out of there. Stars are formed by gravitational collapse of cool, dense gas and dust clouds. Isn't that incredible? They could sit there and make that statement with no observation, no observable evidence, but yet they continue to make that statement. That is forcing faith onto the public. But notice what they say a little further down. There are problems, however, in initiating the collapse of a gas cloud. It resists collapse because of, firstly, its internal motions and heating effects of nearby stars. Secondly, the centrifugal support due to rotation. And thirdly, the magnetic field pressure. In other words, what they said so far is they believe stars are forming this way, even though all the evidence says no. What a strong belief system you have to accept evolution. And then they conclude with this. In a massive, dense cloud shielded by dust, it is, notice this word, believed that collapse can be triggered when the cloud is slowed on passing through the spiral density wave pattern of our galaxy. The whole idea of star formation is based on belief, not observable science. But yet, that is being passed off in our classrooms as science. Why should we accept somebody else's belief when we already have a belief system? Why should our students be forced into learning one particular belief system when there are many belief systems out there? Because they're being held captive by something called evolution and the proponents of evolution. Oh, but wait a minute, Mike. What about these star nurseries out there? What about these great big clouds of gas and dust out there, such as the Eagle Nebula, that great picture we saw in the newspaper and press called star nurseries? These great big nebula out there with these big fingers, dense clouds of fingers pointing up there, and these bright spots in there. Aren't those star nurseries? Isn't that evidence that stars are being formed right there in front of our eyes? No, it is not. You see, once again, we're not being told all the information. We're being told just selected information because some people want everyone to believe in evolution, not science. You see, what causes this? We have these big dark nebula, gas and dust clouds out there. Then we have these other kinds of clouds out there called emission nebula, very bright. And when these two kinds of nebula collide, they force these great big fingers, dark nebula, fingers, gas and dust, to spiral up there. And you see these very hot, bright spots at the fingertips here, as we saw in the Eagle Nebula. Now, those stars forming, well, not by any evidence we know, because when we take a look at those temperatures, and we try and measure the temperatures there, well, we find out these bright spots, the temperature is about 10,000 Kelvin. That is so hot, it could never collapse in. It will have to expand. And sometimes what we're seeing out there, we look out there and we say, oh, we didn't see this bright spot before, now there is one. Well, the reason we're seeing one there now, we didn't see it before, is this gas and dust cloud is expanding, and we're now being able to see areas we couldn't see before because this gas and dust cloud, the thick gas and dust cloud, has hidden it for a while, and it took time for it to expand out. So are stars forming there? Not by any observable evidence we know of. For example, the Horsehead Nebula in Orion. Images, this was one time thought to be a star nursery. But just recently, images taken by the European Southern Observatory Very Large Telescope in January 2002 verified this structure is not collapsing and forming stars. It is expanding. The same thing we believe is happening in the Eagle Nebula and all these other so-called star nursery clouds. So we need to examine all the evidence. But that's not allowed in many of our schools today because we're being captured by a faith called evolution. Well, I like to use numbers here. I like numbers. What I want to do is see if the evolution model really holds up against numbers. Star formation in time. Now, according to the astrophysicists, their calculations are that there are about 100 billion galaxies in our universe. About 100 billion galaxies. Now, they also estimate that each one of these galaxies, on the average, has about 200 billion stars. Now, 100 billion galaxies, that equates to about 10 to the 11th power scientific notation. And 200 billion stars equates to about 2 times 10 to the 11th power scientific notation. Now, if we take this universe to be 20 billion years old, and that's much older than they believe it is today, because the current belief is about 13.5, 13.7 billion years. But we're going to give them 20 billion years. If we put all this into a formula, 100 billion times 200 billion divided by 20 billion, that would come out to be 1 trillion stars forming every year for 20 billion years. That's a lot of stars forming out there. Well, let's bring that number down a little bit to something we can understand a little bit better. That would equate to about 2.7 billion stars forming every day for 20 billion years. Well, let's bring that number down. That would be 31,700 stars forming every second for 20 billion years, and we can't even observe one of these stars forming. The numbers simply do not add up. 31,700 stars every second. We should be able to look out there every second and see stars forming, but we don't. So what's happened here? The numbers simply don't add up for the evolution model. So here's the latest claim. The claim now is that during the initial stages, right after the Big Bang, maybe millions of years or just a billion years, is when almost all the stars formed. They're trying to hide their evidence now. They're making a claim without being able to present any evidence. They're just saying, oh, they all formed billions of years ago, so they're not forming today like they did. Folks, that's not science. That's called a belief system. We need to keep science to the science classroom. Prentice Hall, Earth Science, 2001. Are textbooks correct? Well, here's what they're teaching our youth. A nebula is a large amount of gas and dust spread out in an immense volume. All stars begin their lives as parts of nebula. Then they say, gravity can pull some of the gas and dust in a nebula together. The interacting cloud is then called a protostar. A star is born when the contracting gas and dust become so hot that nuclear fusion starts. Now, is this statement based on any observable science, or is it merely based on a belief in evolution? You see what's happening in our school systems today. How in the world are our youth ever going to have a chance to learn the true science if they're not willing to teach it? Why can't the evolution model simply teach all the science and let students do critical thinking, come to a conclusion? Why must evolution consistently give misleading information or leave out information called deception by omission? You see, any model that's going to call themselves scientific or even call themselves a theory has to be able to present all the scientific information. If they're unwilling to do that, they no longer qualify as a theory or as science. So what we're seeing here in our textbooks today is something called deception by omission. They are unwilling to allow our students today to see all the science. Now, just recently, 2003 here, they sent up another satellite to measure the background radiation of the universe. Now, what they're measuring is something called the cosmic microwave background radiation. Now, what we mean by that, and let me give you an illustration, this background radiation. You have a fireplace, and you've had your fireplace going for hours and hours and hours, and then you turn it off. What happens to those coals or wood in there? Those coals gradually cool down, gradually cool and cool, and you see them turning from a bright orange back to the original color. So it's gradually getting cooler and cooler, and finally you see the last dying embers of the heat that was in that fireplace. That's what we mean by the cosmic microwave background radiation. It is supposed to be the last dying embers, the last heat left over from that tremendous Big Bang explosion about 13.5 billion years ago. So they sent this satellite up there to get a map of the heat and this cosmic microwave background radiation throughout the universe. And here's what they had to say after they sent it up. The most detailed and precise map yet produced of the universe at its birth confirms the Big Bang theory in triumphant detail. It reveals the emergence of the first stars in the cosmos only 200 million years after the Big Bang. 500 million years earlier than theorists had thought. Now, first of all, that statement. Did they show anything different? No, they didn't. They had already had a previous satellite went up there and mapped this whole universe with the cosmic microwave background radiation. All this one did was give us a clearer picture. So it gave us nothing new but a clearer picture. Then notice that statement, emergence of the first stars. Notice nowhere do they say how that happened. They're making a claim with no supporting evidence. That is called faith. We need to be keeping science to the science classroom. I already have a faith. Why should I accept the faith of evolution when we already have one? Why only teach one faith? Why not all the faiths? Why should we be forced into learning just one faith called evolution? So again, a claim without any supporting evidence. Finally, conclusion on star formation. Marcus Chown, in his book, Let There Be Light, his article, Let There Be Light in New Scientist, says this. The truth is that we don't understand star formation at the fundamental level. So the question is, why do textbooks continue to state we know how stars form? The only reason we can come up with is the scientific evidence does not matter. All that matters is we believe in evolution. So we've looked at the two models. We looked at evidence of age. We looked at the origin of stars. Now let's look at scientific evidence and the Big Bang. And again, the statement, are we being given all the evidence or just selected information to support a particular idea? And here's another question, evidence in the Big Bang. Are the evidences used to support the Big Bang or evolution convincing enough to warrant a belief in billions of years? Is there enough evidence for the Big Bang to warrant a billion-year-old universe? Well, let's look at the evidences commonly used to support the Big Bang. And they would include the redshift of starlight, cosmic background radiation, element abundance, and the education system in the media. That's probably the biggest evidence to support the Big Bang, the education system in the media. But now, let's look at the evidences that go against the Big Bang. And notice what they are. Redshift of starlight, cosmic background radiation, galaxy formation, spiral galaxies, supernova remnants, distribution of galaxies, first and second laws of thermodynamics, medium-heavy elements, star formation. And we can go on and on and on. How many of those are mentioned in textbooks? There really aren't. But notice this one thing. The evidence used to support the Big Bang, there's also evidence in the same things like the redshift that go against the Big Bang. All those are left out of our textbooks. Our students are only seeing selected information, not all the data. So let's look at some of this. The Big Bang. Here's the Handy Space Answer Book, 1998. This is how they describe the Big Bang. 15 to 20 billion years ago, a Big Bang or explosion occurred, creating the universe. The universe began as an infinitely dense, hot fireball, a scrambling of space and time. Now, we need to understand the Big Bang model. The Big Bang model is not like a dynamite explosion. That's not what it is. What the Big Bang model is, it's an expansion of space and time. So somewhere we start with a ball of matter and energy. Now, wait a minute. Here's the first problem. Where did that initial matter and energy come from? Well, I want to do something here real technical. And I might go a little faster than this. If I go too fast, I might have to repeat it here. Here's where that original matter and energy came from. This is heavy college stuff now. There was nothing there, no universe or anything. Then there was something. Is that too technical? But that's the only explanation we have. They call it a scientific term called a quantum fluctuation. Quantum fluctuation is just another name for magic. Now again, this universe starts with some hypothetical mass and energy and suddenly starts exploding or expanding. So it's a tremendous expansion of space and time. And the other thing we need to understand about the Big Bang model is there is no center to this universe. A what? No center? How did that happen? Well, we start from a central point, but as the universe expands, space and time, there's nothing in the center. That is critical for the Big Bang model. All our galaxies are like on the edge out there, on the edge. An analogy, here's a rough analogy. You have a balloon, deflated balloon, no air in it. And you put all these markings on these dots on the balloon to represent galaxies. Then as you blow it up and up and up, the balloon expands. And what happens to all those dots? They stay on the edge there. And what's in the middle? Well, really nothing. There's nothing in the middle there. That is the Big Bang model. It's an expansion of space and time. So does this sudden explosion of nothing into something sound like a miracle? Well, it might. Paul Davies, who is a physicist and an evolutionist, states in his book, The Edge of Infinity, describes the Big Bang this way. The Big Bang represents the instantaneous suspension of physical laws, the sudden, abrupt flash of lawlessness that allowed something to come out of nothing. It represents a true miracle. Now, why is that any more scientific then than in the beginning God created? It's not. Matter of fact, it's even less scientific. But yet, we're being forced to believe it. So, let's take a look at one of these evidences that is used to support the Big Bang and also used to go against the Big Bang, the redshift of starlight. Now, we have this light spectrum out there. And on our light spectrum, we have two ends of it. One is the blue side, ultraviolet, and the other side is the red side, or infrared. Now, what I want to do here is describe what we mean by redshift of starlight. And let me give you an analogy here. Well, how this is going to happen. You have a car approaching you. Car approaches you, and it has its horn on. And its horn stays on. And as that car approaches you, what happens to the pitch of the sound? Well, it gets higher and higher and higher. Why? Because as it's approaching you with the horn on, the sound waves get compressed, and the pitch goes up. But once that vehicle passes you, with its horn still on, what happens to the pitch of the sound? Well, it gets lower and lower because the sound waves are now being stretched. Well, light waves do the same thing. As a light source is moving towards you, the waves get compressed, and the light will show up on the blue side of the spectrum. Now, we're not saying the light is blue, but the elements will show up as a line on the blue side. But if a light source is moving away from you, it will show up on the red side of the light spectrum, meaning they're being stretched out, the light waves. Now, redshifts are used to describe the expansion of the universe, the distance a galaxy is away from us. Most everything in this universe we observe is redshifted, giving the idea that everything is moving away from us, hence supporting the Big Bang model of some large expansion or explosion about 13.5 billion years ago. That is the Big Bang model. And based on that idea of redshift, the Big Bang model seems to be true. Now, Let's take a look at this redshift interpretation. It's an interpretation. Redshift is the distance a galaxy is away from us. So if we were to see a galaxy out a particular distance, redshift it, let's say galaxy 1 here, it would show up on the redshift, the red side of the light spectrum. But if there was a second galaxy and it was further away, it would show out further on the red side of the spectrum. And if there was a third galaxy that was even further away from that, it would show up further out on the red side of the light spectrum. So the distance a galaxy is away from us, the further it will show on the red side. Now, here's something. One of the keys to the Big Bang model is that this universe is homogeneous. Homogeneous, meaning everywhere in the universe, it looks the same. There's no special place at all in this universe. Everywhere we look out there in the universe, it should appear the same. So based on that idea of the Big Bang, when we look at these galaxies, we see redshift lines all up and down that red shift. At every interval, we see galaxies all up and down that red shift. That's what we should see based on the Big Bang model. A homogeneous universe with no center, redshift everywhere up and down there. But in fact, that is not what we observe. What we observe is these redshifts coming at distinct quanta, distinct intervals. And they happen to be at intervals of 1 million light years. Something is not right with the Big Bang model. The Big Bang model says we should have redshifts everywhere, homogeneous universe, but we're not. We see, for instance, we look at our Milky Way galaxy. We look out 1 million light years, we see redshifts, but nothing in between. We look out another 2 million light years, we see another redshift, but nothing between 1 million and 2 million. The Big Bang model says we should see them all the way through 1 to 2 million. We look out, we see them again at 3 million light years. In other words, what we are observing out there is what appears to be concentric circles around our galaxy. Distinct quanta. The Big Bang does not predict that at all. The Big Bang says we should have a homogeneous universe. Everywhere we look, everything should be the same, all up and down that red side. So has this been confirmed, though? Because this could be devastating to the Big Bang model. Has this been confirmed? Well, W.G. Tift and W.J. Koch, right in the Astrophysical Journal in 1984, made this statement. There is now very firm evidence that redshifts of galaxies are quantized. We knew all the way back in 1984 that they were quantized. But since that went against the norm, that went against the Big Bang model, there was so much skepticism that it was completely ignored. Now, neither one of these astronomers are creationists. They're both evolutionists that found this. Russell Humphreys, PhD in physics, writes this. Astronomers have confirmed that numerical values of galaxy redshifts are quantized, tending to fall into distinct groups. That would mean the galaxies tend to be grouped into conceptual spherical shells concentric around our home galaxy. That was 2002. Has this been confirmed? Yes, it has. Here's several more astronomers writing in 1997, Journal of Astrophysics and Astronomy. The redshift distribution has been found to be strongly quantized in galacticocentric frame of reference. The phenomena is easily seen by eye and apparently cannot be ascribed to statistical artifacts, selection procedures, or flawed reduction techniques. In other words, it has been confirmed. Quantized redshifts have been confirmed. We see these concentric circles around our galaxy. It's been so confirmed now the Hubble telescope has confirmed it out to 1 billion light years. Now, what does this mean to the Big Bang? Well, this could be devastating to the Big Bang because it completely goes against the predictions of the Big Bang. So what does it mean? Well, to understand what it means to the Big Bang, we need to go back and understand something about the Copernican principle. Anybody remember Copernicus? All the way back in 1540s, Copernicus made a heretical statement. He said the Earth is not the center of the universe. Whoa! That was being labeled a heretic back then for doing that. Said, we're no special place in the universe. We're not the center. Before then, everybody believed we're the center. But the Big Bang cosmology is based upon this Copernican principle. Let's read what they have to say. The Copernican or cosmological principle is a key ingredient to modern cosmology, which states that we are in no preferred or special place in the universe. The conclusion from this is that the universe appears the same in all directions when viewed from any point in space. In other words, we have this homogeneous universe. No matter where we're located in the universe, it should appear to be the same. Well, here's what the evolutionists have to say about this. Stephen Hawking and George Ellis write in 1973, "In the earliest cosmologies, man placed himself in a commanding position at the center of the universe. Since the time of Copernicus, we have been steadily demoted to a medium-sized planet going around a medium-sized star on the outer edge of a fairly average galaxy, which is itself simply one of a group of galaxies." Doesn't that make you feel very special now? You're in no preferred place anywhere in the universe. You're not even a preferred species. An astrophysicist writes this in 1993 out of Nature. "The Copernican revolution taught us that it was a mistake to assume without sufficient reason that we occupy a privileged position in the universe. Darwin showed that in terms of origin, we are not privileged above other species. Our position around an ordinary star in an ordinary galaxy in an ordinary supercluster continues to look less and less special." And he continues, "The idea that we are not located in a special spatial location," get this now, "has been crucial in cosmology, leading directly to the Big Bang Theory. In astronomy, the Copernican principle works because of all the places for intelligent observers to be. There are, by definition, only a few special places and many non-special places. So you're likely to be in a non-special place." In other words, the Big Bang model is dependent upon we are not in a special place, and this universe is homogeneous. That is the core, that is a core foundation for the Big Bang. So, from the evolution perspective, we are a non-special species living in a non-special place in the universe. We are nothing more than an accident of chance occurrences. But does the evidence really support this idea? And the answer is no. The observable information clearly contradicts the Big Bang model. Russell Humphreys, again, in his book, Starlight and Time, makes this statement. "The quantized distribution of galactic redshifts observed by various astronomers seems to contradict the Copernican principle and all cosmologies founded upon it, including the Big Bang." The only way we could be observing, the only way we know we could be observing these concentric circles of redshifts around our galaxy is that our galaxy has to be within 1 million light years of the center of this universe. Now, I'm not talking geocentricity there, which says the Earth is the center. We're talking galactic centricity, that our galaxy is near the center of the universe. It could be moving, but it's near the center. What does that say? It says the Big Bang, the whole foundation for the Big Bang, is false. The observable evidence clearly supports today it is false. Halton Arp, another astronomer and evolutionist, very popular evolutionist, very popular astronomer, says this: "The fact that measured values of redshifts do not vary continuously but come in steps, meaning quantized steps, certain preferred values, is so unexpected that conventional astronomy has never been able to accept it, in spite of the overwhelming observational evidence." What he's saying there is this: that despite all the evidence against the Big Bang, they refuse to accept it. In other words, what we said before is the evidence does not matter. All that matters is that we believe in evolution. And that is what our students are being subjected to throughout this country in the school system. They're being subjected to a belief system, not being taught the science. So let's look at a summary of our evidences. Evidence appears to support the Big Bang only when contradictions are ignored. The Big Bang model has been considered. We believe in evolution. And that is what our students are being subjected to throughout this country in the school system. They're being subjected to a belief system, not being taught the science. So let's look at a summary of our evidences. Evidence appears to support the Big Bang only when contradictions are ignored. The Big Bang model has been consistently changing to match the data. And the Big Bang model cannot explain much of the data we observe. So are the evidences used to support the Big Bang convincing enough to warrant a belief in billions of years? I don't believe so. The evidence clearly supports a younger universe. Let's take a look at the Big Bang in a nutshell. Kenneth C. Davis writes in his book, Don't Know Much About the Universe, 2001. And he says, in a nutshell, the Big Bang, or as some cosmologists prefer to call it, the standard model of cosmology goes something like this. About 15 billion years ago, the universe erupted from an enormous and still unexplained event, often referred to as a singularity, from which all of space and matter were created. And he concludes, that's why you can't say it was an explosion. Nothing can't explode. And at the instant of the Big Bang, there was something. It's a little like a cosmic episode of Seinfeld, the show about nothing. It also didn't happen anywhere, that is, in a single location, but everywhere. So let's go to the last part now. The Bible and Big Bang cosmology. Can we fit the Big Bang into the Bible? Well, Dr. Danny Faulkner, again, PhD in astronomy, makes this statement. There are many today who interpret Genesis in terms of the latest scientific theories and even fads. If the history of science is any teacher, then we must conclude that many of these ideas eventually will be discarded. In other words, what we believe to be true about science one day turned out to be false the next. And then he concludes by saying this. If we have staked out a position that Genesis teaches these ideas, then what is to become of Genesis when these are abandoned? A great concern of mine is that many Christians have wedded the creation account of the Bible to the Big Bang theory. What he's saying there is, if you're accepting the Big Bang and you're interpreting the Bible based on the Big Bang, what are you going to do when the Big Bang goes away and they come up with some other new model? You see, the Bible, we need to start our worldview with God's Word, not man's fallible, changing Word. Dr. John Byle also has a PhD in astronomy. He writes this in his book, God and Cosmos, a Christian view of time, space, and the universe. And he says, first, Big Bang cosmology, even though it is currently by far the most popular cosmology, and even though it is presented as undoubtedly true, is beset with a number of serious observational and theoretical difficulties. And then Werner Gitt, PhD in physics, writes this. It is a great pity that many Christians are willing to reinterpret the infallible Word of God to fit a fallible, man-made theory like the Big Bang. Such ideas are ultimately devised to counter the biblical record, which is firmly against cosmic evolution over billions of years. And he concludes, those who urge trying to harmonize the Big Bang with Scripture find it only natural to go on to other evolutionary ideas, such as a primitive Earth, gradually cooling down, death and struggle millions of years before the fall, and so on. That is exactly what we see happening in many mainline churches today. These churches that have gone off and compromised the foundation, Genesis, are now teaching many things such as, well, maybe there's no such thing as a virgin birth. Maybe Jesus really didn't die on the cross. There's many ways to get to heaven. You see, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? God warned us. He told us we have to hold on to our foundation. But what we see across this country is those churches that have compromised Genesis have now compromised the very gospel of Jesus Christ. But you know, there are many, many scientists out there today that reject the Big Bang. There are many, many scientists in every area of science today that believe exactly what the Bible teaches. That in the beginning, God created. He did it in 6 literal days, only about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. Why do they believe that? For 2 reasons. One, that is exactly what the Bible teaches, and secondly, they can support it scientifically. What does the Bible have to say about time? The Bible says a lot about time. There are at least 12 biblical evidences that teach that the days of creation were literal days. There's nothing in the Bible that says this earth is billions of years old. There's nothing in the Bible that says these days of creation were long, indefinite periods of time. We have the day with a number, evening and morning. The days are actually defined in Genesis. In Exodus 20, verse 11, God writes down himself on the stone tablets, the Ten Commandments, for in 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. He wrote it down that he created everything in 6 days. At least 12 biblical evidences that these days of creation were literal days. And what does that suggest? That this earth and this universe are not that old. Also in the Bible, 17 places in the Bible, it states that God stretched the heavens. 17 times it declares that God just stretched the heavens out. Now what that means, I don't know since I wasn't there, but it must be something significant. God could have just taken everything and stretched it out. And maybe that's why we're seeing many things redshifted. 17 places. We also have to understand and remember we have a God of miracles. We have a God that can do all these miracles. God created trees mature with fruit. God created mature animals. God created Adam and Eve fully mature. They didn't have to grow from babies. Jesus fed the 5,000 from a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus turned water into wine instantly. Jesus withered the fig tree instantly in Matthew 21. We had the instant learning of language at the Tower of Babel. Instant healing of the soldier's ear in the garden. And we have a God who said his creation was very good. We have a God of miracles. We have a God who can do all this. Jeremiah 32:17 tells us we have a God that can do all this. O Lord God, behold, thou hast created the heaven and the earth by thy great power and outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for thee. The question is that the God we worship? Or do we need to bring God down to our level of understanding in science? In other words, once we begin bringing God down to what we understand about science, we begin creating God in our image. And that is called idolatry. So what have we seen about the pattern of evolution? We've seen not reporting all the evidence, consistently updating the Big Bang model to match the observed data, disagreement among the astronomers, a complete disregard for biblical interpretation, and then the new tactic is appeal to churches to accept real sciences. You can have evolution and have your religion. You can have evolution and have the Bible. No, you can't. You can have evolution and have your religion because religions are man-made things. But you cannot have evolution in the Bible because the Bible is not a man-made religion. The Bible comes from God, the creator of all things. And he said, he spoke it into existence by his great power. So, some critical thinking here. Which is easier to believe? Nothing created something called the universe, or God used evolution, or in the beginning, God created. But you know, the Bible teaches why so many choose to believe nothing created something, or why many believed in theistic evolution. It says right in 2 Timothy 4:3-4 why so many people choose not to believe God's word, where it says, "For the time will come, will they not endure sound doctrine. But after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables." And folks, those fables today come in something called evolution. That's why so many people believe it. Because God warned us that we're willing to listen to anything other than the Word of God. Even to the point of compromising God's Word, called theistic evolution. And then finally, there's some questions from scientists. A Los Alamos paper written in 2002 made these statements. Moreover, there are some questions that scientists still do not know how to ask, let alone answer scientifically. And these questions are these. Was there anything before the Big Bang? Is there a role for life in the cosmos? Why is there something rather than nothing? Will we ever know? Those are questions they can't answer scientifically. But folks, if you go to the Word of God, you'll have your answers. The creation by God gives meaning to the universe. We are created in the image and likeness of God. And we have a God that so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that we would listen to him and we would accept him as Lord and Savior. And we have a God who says it does not matter what you've done, because his grace and mercy can cover everything. That is the God we're talking about. The Bible answers all these questions. The question for you is, which do you choose?